Hi, folks. This is our week 2 introduction for um, English 2331, the online asynchronous section. Here I am back in my kitchen table, and a lot of this stuff I went through over in my intro video for the course as a whole. I just kind of wanted to make a habit of popping in and basically checking with folks. Okay, so first of all, I'm really enjoying going through and reading your discussion board posts and commenting on. I'm trying to leave one comment per board directly to the author. Um, One thing that's two things about that. Let me go ahead and share my screen so that we're looking at Blackboard. Um, Let us see here. Yes, here we go. Yes. All right, so we are about okay. Now you can see Blackboard. Uh, and this is should be yeah, this is student view. So this is what you guys see. Um, Make sure that when you're doing your discussion boards, we'll pop over to discussions real quick. Um, Somebody's already started on discussion board 2, which is fantastic. I haven't even looked at that yet. But remember that to get full credit for the discussion board, you need to respond to somebody else's thread. So you need to create your own thread, introduce yourself, talk about any questions you may have on the syllabus, and then also respond to somebody else's thread. That will get you your 60 points. Also, it is imperative, right, that you turn this assignment in on time because this is our census date assignment. We are an asynchronous course. This is how I'm going to see that you are, quote unquote, attending the course. So it is imperative that you turn this assignment in on time. It's due Saturday the 6th. The census date is the 10th. I need this well before the 10th because they're really pushing for compliance on the census right now, given newly enacted state law and stuff like that. So I really need for you to for you to engage in the board. And again, to get your full credit, you need to both create a post and respond to somebody else. And it's interesting. This new version of Blackboard gives me all kinds of analytics. I can see, how your post compares to other people's posts in terms of number of words, in terms of sophistication level. Now, how they may be determining that might be a little bit arbitrary. I don't know, but it's still kind of interesting. I'm not holding you to any of that, right? I'm not, it's fine with me, particularly in the introductory post, right? That if everybody's kind of casual and comfortable, I'm fine with that throughout the term, provided that when we get into talking about the literature on the boards, that that you are actually engaging with the material, referencing the material, talking about the ideas that the material is invoking for you. That's fine. If you want to be casual and so forth, I have no problem with that. Okay, so let's move on to our content for the week. So again, as I said, the only assignment that is due is the board, right? And you access it just like I did. Click discussions and then click on board 1 and so forth. Right now, we've got 10 folks, I believe, who have not engaged with the board at all, and a few folks who have not posted 2 posts, right? Um, you know, so okay. So within the week 2 folder, right? So we've got a folder that has a bunch of theoretical frameworks in it, and these are having to do with literary lenses, right? So we're blessed. This course, I'm so excited about this course. We're very blessed in this course because we have so many burgeoning English majors in here. So really this PDF, the Purdue Owl Literary Theory PDF, is going to give you a jump start on what um, uh, studying literature from an academic perspective is really all about, right? It's gonna give you brief overviews of some of the major pushes towards how people read literature and reading practice and interpretive practice over the last 30 or 40 years, right? Some of these have been in kind of the mainstays for that long. Okay, so and I'm not expecting anybody to be expert, right? I've delved into this stuff. I'm not an expert, right? I've delved into this stuff for the last 30 years. I would not call myself an expert on any of these theories. Okay, but this gives you the basic breakdown and the basic tenets and the philosophical underpinnings of these theories. So particularly if you are an English major or an English secondary ed major, et cetera, and so on. Even though in secondary ed, you're probably not going to ask somebody, okay, give me a reader response to X, Y, and Z, or deconstruct X text or something like that, right? Knowing how this is done and so on, and being exposed to it is really important. It's particularly if you move as you move through your English major. And frankly, I went to graduate school at the same institution that I got my undergrad from. And my undergrad, they emphasized teacher training, right? So I was never asked to do anything with theoretical frameworks. As soon as I got into graduate school, they're like, oh yeah, you must use a theoretical framework. You have to use theories and so forth in my first semester. And I got into graduate school, I had to teach myself all that stuff, right? I had, and with the help of a couple of really great professors, I had to really delve into that stuff and basically make up for lost time, because when I got into graduate school, they expected me to generate knowledge, right? They expected me to engage with these theories and even to be critical of the theories, right? Um, Whereas in my undergraduate education, it was pretty much, okay, can you go in and teach Macbeth to, high school sophomore, that sort of thing, right? So anyway, it's good practice, right? Now, getting into the text for the week, the Epic of Gilgamesh. I delve fully into the Epic of Gilgamesh over the weekend. Um, it's a lot of fun. Okay. Um, it's your quintessential buddy piece. It deals very deeply with grief, deals with issues of mortality. You got a lot of um, angry gods in there. It's deals with relationships between men and women. Um, and there is a very, very strong parallel to the Noah's flood, from Genesis. So if that's a narrative that you've grown up with and so forth, it's interesting to see the the Gilgamesh version of it, which arguably is older. Okay. Um, at least in terms of it being committed to text. I mean, the Noah version, as far as oral tradition and stuff like that, that's almost splitting hairs, but it's been around as long as the Noah story, right? So it's real interesting to see those parallels. It's interesting to see where they're different too, right? Okay. Um, and what does that difference mean, right? Like what does the presence of somebody like Inky, mean in the Gilgamesh version? Anyway, I'll let y'all read it. Um, if you look at nothing else with regard to the Epic of Gilgamesh, please look at this video introduction to the Epic of Gilgamesh. It is expertly done. Okay. And so that your first clue there is that I didn't do it, right? I didn't make this video, but it is a beautifully done video. It's probably, I guess, 20 minutes. Why is my video showing raised hand? I do not know. Um, uh, anyway, Hopefully the raised hand will go away. Um, I apologize for that distraction. Um, okay. So next, okay, yeah, we're looking at Epic of Gilgamesh. Same thing, there's a lot of stuff there. My take on the Gilgamesh, right? And this is, probably my take has evolved somewhat. This is from several years ago, but it's still, if you want to listen to me drone on about Gilgamesh, watch this Gilgamesh recap video. Here's the text itself, the Mitchell, which is kind of the standard version. Spark Notes, if you want kind of a breakdown of it, right? They give you a lot of tools to delve into the text. Um, I just added this Dixon Epic of Gilgamesh graphic novel. It is very well done. It goes beyond what is in the Mitchell, so it extends the story further. I don't know if that's because Dixon had uh, more information than what Mitchell had, like additional plates and stuff that he's drawing upon. I doubt that's the case. I think probably he used a little bit of creative license there. But in any case, it's interesting. I would um, focus on the Mitchell though, honestly. Um, okay, optional reading on Genesis. Again, you want to hear me drone on about Genesis? Watch this video. Who wrote the Torah is it's so I could go on for a really long time about this. I won't, but just to say that there's pretty overwhelming textual evidence that there's about four major textual strands within what we call Genesis, what we call the Torah and the Tanakh. Well, the Tanakh's got even more, but the Torah more at large. But so there's and these narrative strands strongly suggest different authors, right? And that these texts were ultimately redacted together into the form that we have now, um, roughly around the time of the Babylonian exile, right? So that actually, and I may be getting that a little bit. I may be getting that date slightly um, off, but the idea is that although the narratives within the text may well be ancient, right? Oh, well, all of this is ancient because when you're talking about the Babylonian captivity, we're compared to us, it's ancient, but whereas the narratives themselves, in many cases, may because of world transmission and so forth, extend back thousands and thousands of years and whatnot. The actual codified textual form is not quite as old, right? Um, so, and this is something, and if later on, if you look at quote unquote Satan's Guide to the Bible, this is something that biblical scholars and textual critics and so on and so forth have known and been talking about for well over 100 years, more like 200 years, but it's not something that you're going to hear from most pulpits. Some pastors will talk about this, but most pulpits you're not going to hear this from for a number of reasons. And there is a difference, right, between looking at a text in a sacred context versus looking at a text from a historical context or a literary context. For example, I think it's very valuable to apply, something like the hero's journey, for example, to any number of the narratives in Genesis. That's not something that you're necessarily going to see somebody do, from a pulpit or do in a Bible study, right? It's the purpose is different, right? The purpose is different, right? Um, and a lot of people can draw, a lot of criticism from, a lot of, I should say, could criticize a lot of biblical scholars and so forth and say, well, these guys are just atheists and so on and so forth. And a number of them are, right? If you look at the top biblical historical biblical historicist, right, uh, for the past couple of decades is Bart Ehrman. He is an avowed atheist, but he started out a very, very dedicated fundamentalist. And if you want to get to know about him and his story, whatever, listen to his podcast, right? And he gets into all that. If you want somebody that does similar work, who is a person of faith, very deep faith, in fact, somebody like Dan McClellan, right, who has a very deep faith and yet acknowledges that there are issues with the text, right, and what and so uh and so that's what it is. I and I'm not here to argue matters of faith, right? That's not what I'm about. I'm about looking at the text and seeing what the text as a work of literature has to offer us, right? Right. What we can potentially learn from it, what we can learn about ourselves, and how we can apply these texts, to our own lives in some interesting ways that again, might may or may not differentiate from various theological applications, right? Uh, of the text that we've seen. Um, so yeah, I always tell students, a lot of students that come in, particularly freshmen, sophomores, and I used to teach this stuff. I used to teach a lot. I mean, the teaching of writing and literature, particularly to freshmen, sophomores, has kind of diverged over the past couple of decades. And we used to teach novels and so forth in college, in writing, college writing classes, even and I would in conversations about biblical texts and so forth would enter into the conversation again because these texts, particularly in terms of Western literature, are foundational, right? I mean, for 1,000 years, like I said in my previous video, like the one text that people could reference, whether they could read or not, even, right, it was the Bible, right? Even if they never actually read the Bible, they knew the narratives, they knew the stories, right, or versions of the stories. So, in any case, right, so biblical texts would come up, or sacred texts, not just the Bible, but like the Bhagavad Gita, the Quran, etc., would come up. And I would always say, I would say to students, write yourself into the story. And what I mean by that is, find meaning for yourself in the narrative, in the text. Because it's one thing to follow something because your parents say, well, this is the way we've always done it. But how fulfilling is that going to be, right? If you choose to follow a faith, do so because it means something to you, that you can see yourself um, as a part of this, right? And so that too, right? When we read any text, what we're doing is we are in a cooperative act with the various authors, such that we are taking the author's words, and in vast majority of the text that we're looking at here, it's even more complicated because we're also we've got a translation filter as well. So we're not only original authors, but also translators, redactors, so forth. But all these different filters, right? All these different uh, air levels of sort of removal from the original text, and then here we come in and we are taking the text in the form that we have it, and we are re-envisioning it. Each individual reader is re-envisioning it in a sense because we're bringing our own understanding of that language, of that, of those images and so on and so forth, and we, based on who we are you know, and we're recreating that within our own consciousness, right? And so that's why, each time you come to a text, you may well come to it entirely differently, right? Reading the Epic of Gilgamesh, it's different for me at 50 than it did at 30, right? Why? Because I've had some pretty interesting experiences within those 20 years, right? That that can be seen as sort of parallel to some of the stuff in Gilgamesh, right? So, all right, I'm gonna shut up because I've probably gone on for half an hour already. Um, and if you have any questions, so forth, drop me an email, and I will see you on the discussion boards. Okay. All right. Have a great week, everybody.